I'm glad you all came. Thank you very much. We're excited to have this poet laureate with us. This is John Warner Smith. He began writing poetry while he was building a successful career as a banker and a public administrator. He's published 5 collections of poetry. One was Muhammad's Mountain, one was Spirits of the Gods, Soul Be a Witness, A Mandala of Hands, and Our Shut Eyes, that was published just recently, April of 2021. His poems have appeared in literary journals across the country. They've been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and for the Best of the Net anthology by Sundress Publications. And in 2019, he was awarded the Linda Hodge Bromberg Poetry Award. In that same year, he was Lee Ball. In that same year, he was appointed to a 2-year term as the Poet Laureate, so he's just our former Poet Laureate by Governor Edwards, John Bell. He is now, though, this is the most exciting thing, the new executive director of the Shadows on the Teche. So he's now in our community, a new neighbor. So we hope you welcome him. And the secret is out. He was holding all the cards, but...
Sure, very much. Appreciate that, and thanks all of you for coming out here this afternoon. I was speaking to Addie, right, Charlotte, a minute ago, 3rd grade, and I was asking her if she could take a guess when I recited my very first poem publicly, not one that I wrote, and she said 20 years old. I was actually 5 years old. I promised her, I told her I'd recite that poem. I was in kindergarten. Jingle, jingle, bright and clear, I love my ears with which I hear. It's funny how, I can forget what I did yesterday. But to go back that many years, yeah. I'll never forget that I was nervous, so nervous, man. My knees were buckling, I was perspiring, I was shaking like crazy, but I got it done. So, thanks again for coming. I'm going to maybe read a little while and then stop and talk and answer questions, have a dialogue with you guys, and then maybe finish up with a couple of fairly new poems, all right? Raise your hands if anyone in the room has had a member of the family or a friend who's suffered Alzheimer's disease. Okay, good. I thought every time I ask that question, a lot of hands go up. It's such a common, disease, sickness, and one day we'll figure it out and find a cure for it. I have a couple of poems related to that. My father died of Alzheimer's in 2013, and for 7 years I went on the journey with him from the day that he first spoke words to me about his loss of memory. So for 7 years I was his caregiver, and I was living 2 hours away in another city. He was living alone because my mother had passed away several years before he got sick, and he was just trying to cope and do the normal things on his own. And so anyway, enough said. A little note here about the first poem. Dad had retired as a railroad worker, and at this time in the poem, he's a crossing guard, crossing little children across a 4-lane highway every morning, and was beginning to lose his grip on reality at that time. So here we go. The title is, and it's in 2 parts, Crossing. Work days you tiptoed the high wire and steep cliff ledge, wearing blue twill and a bright orange vest. Each crosswalk a sea, a compass, a cargo of children. Still earth passed you by, with timepieces you strapped to each wrist for trips to Texas and California, circling city blocks and returning home. Something has fallen out of my head, you said, just weeks before Katrina made bones of the city and broke the hand of Jesus. When Rita came exhaling, I begged you to leave, but you stayed, half beast, half child, living in no man's land. You resisted my tearing down the great wall you built of ants and souring pots and junk mail. One morning, I pulled a drawer and found your pistol, old vials of blue pills, and years of unspent cash. 2. Stars drown in the black drone of waves you cross. In cold light, you lie down with newborn feels and scented voices, a titter and a word short of laughter. Hands lock in a mudra. We feed you. Old vessel, sweet demon, do we cage you crib-like to protect you from yourself? Or is it the delicate crystal within we fear? The next poem is also about Dad in a different sort of way. And by the way, that first poem, it was one of the first poems I had published as a creative writer, just really starting to write poetry seriously for publication. And I was so happy that they chose that one because it was so special to me. This next poem is titled Inner Space. Inner Space, I'll tell you where this poem appears. A few years back, I collaborated with a visual artist. His name's Dennis Paul Williams. I don't know if anybody knows Dennis. Okay. Dennis is on 4 of my 5 covers. His art is on 4 of 5 of my book covers, and he and I are very close friends. We had talked about a collaboration where I would write poetry to his art, right? And we finally decided, well, let's just do it. And so for months, I don't know, 8, 9 months, Dennis would text me these pictures of his art, and then I would take a while, would take one at a time and write a poem, right? Here's one of them, and I wish I had the art to show this photograph, the image that inspired this poem, but it's titled Inner Space. The loss of my father's memory of me didn't hurt nearly as much as my having him arrested, locked down, and made to walk like a zombie, wandering hallways and pulling on locked doors that he thought would take him home. In that space, I believed he discovered his own planet without humans, streets, and animals he had once known. But who's to say? He didn't talk with extraterrestrials, didn't see and hear angels singing his favorite Zydeco songs. Who's to say he didn't love? Another poem taken from that same collection, it's titled Dreaming. One morning I awoke from dreaming that I had been called up to pitch a Yankees-Mets game. This is a true story, by the way. Yankees-Mets playing each other.
Which one were you supposed to?
Oh, wait. I don't know. I don't remember the dream that well. I don't know. That's a good question. I had left home at 5:30 p.m. to drive to the stadium. Outdoors, chimes were jingling in the lightly swirling trees. Clouds moved south and made the moon disappear. Later, I made the sound of rain with a 1-cup tin pot, percolating on a low blue flame. As I thought of her lying in bed and what I wore our first Easter, beige polyester knit slacks, a brown and white paisley shirt, and a brown patent leather belt. I married that girl too. Anyway, let me finish. The moon returned and winked. Favorite songs rising on the charts, and my first start in a big game. Yeah. Anybody here knows what let me reverse this question. Raise your hand if you do not know what Zydeco is. I better not see a hand in this one. Be surprised how many hands go up when I ask that question in other parts of the country when I read this poem. Zydeco on Dog Hill. I think it's mature enough for you. I think so. Just be careful. There is a little violence in it, I must warn you. But, it's not too bad. Zydeco on Dog Hill. Now, Dog Hill, a little footnote here, is in Lake Charles, Louisiana. It's a community actually called Dog Hill. Anybody familiar with Dog Hill? Out in Prion Lake Road? Okay. Before they put Cousin Gladys inside the ground in a cornrow of fair-skinned Creole men, I sat in her funeral mass imagining two shadows dancing in the swish of a swift-moving blade that slit her dreams in half and sent her father strolling across the cane field like a land-bending river, turning a page she could never turn back. Her husband had been jailed, and a man had been killed. I heard spoons scratching a washboard and a Zydeco accordion pump a groove through a sweat-dripping rumble of fast, shuffling feet. I felt the wooden floor turn to water and tasted the salty wave as Jojo, her lover, swung out, flaunting his gabardine in two tones. His wide-brimmed fedora suddenly seen whirling in a herd of flamingos and a pool of whiskey-warm blood. I hope y'all don't get it, because if y'all don't get it, she's not going to get it. And by the way, let me say this, and that is a made-up story, but I don't have a cousin, Gladys. I got some cousins who might come close to fitting that description, but that's not a true story. But just to show you sometimes how poetry is born, I honestly don't know where the story came from, but when I went down that road and started just thinking this stuff up, you know, there were some seeds of some things, incidents, experiences of my personal life that proved to be sort of inspiration for the poem. My grandfather, Andrew, actually did kill a man. He spent a year and a half in prison for manslaughter. He raised me as a boy. He spent that time. My mother was 3 years old, and my grandmother, you know, told me a story once about how she got the news that my grandfather had been jailed, and it was her father who came strolling through the cane field to tell her that Andrew was not coming home. You see, so that got kind of put into all the other stuff about, you know, Gladys and her lover JoJo and stuff that just came out of my head. Now here's a poem, Sister's Mourning. I have a lot of women in my family, older women, whom I love. In my family, I don't know about yours, but the older people happen to be mostly women. Us men don't hang around as long as they do. I don't know why. Maybe it's kind of the life we live, huh? But here's a poem about women sisters who are beginning to experience, you know, sort of one death after another, because they are all old and they're mourning. So it's Sisters Mourning. That year, the old sisters wore black in every season, emptying hope chests like a roof-tearing twister. So much to keep, so little to pass on. They must have sensed fear flashing in their uteruses and wondered what locust larva lay dormant beneath the golden rod, boring their tender limbs, reminding them of limpid days, limpid skies, how bound they were to things living. Some days, they gathered to celebrate the family. Sundays in the sun, young lovers with nests full of babies, old lovers with memories cradled in their brows. Circled beneath a canopy of oaks, they boiled blue crabs and crawfish in an open flame. They told their stories with songs and black and white photographs between shuffled cards and dots counted on small ivory stones. But now, 4 hand fans later, the sisters speak of fallen branches. They take refuge in beveled mirrors, in quiet times with questions dangling in a slip knot. From their necks hang hand-knitted scarves and the albatrosses of pain not forgiven, salutations written but never sent. Still, they wait to see patterns quilted for the spring bazaar, the evergreens blooming in their winters. Through the lives of their great grandchildren unborn, they wait, silent about their steep climbs and falls. So I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. Our Shut Eyes was published 2021. By the way, I have a novella, a short novel that was published last November by UL Press. I won't be reading from it, but that was actually my most recent publication. This collection started out being, I guess you might say, a collection of some new poems and some old poems. A collection of old poems and some new poems. I shifted gears halfway into writing the new poems, and I thought, well, you know, this is the 40th. This is going to be coming up the 40th year of the Atlanta child murders. Anyone familiar with the Atlanta child murders? Late 70s? Yeah, and quick news story here. About 28 black children came up missing over 2 years period of time, and they couldn't find them. Mostly boys. 2 of the 28, I think, were girls. They couldn't find these kids. When they went missing, eventually they found them in an alley or dumped in a river, in the woods, dead. So I thought it would be appropriate to memorialize those children with some poems. It's hard to write about that. I mean, that kind of experience, right? But so I struggled a lot in doing this. But I'll read one of the poems about one of the Atlanta children, and then I'll read one of the new poems, which has got a little New Iberia connection to it. So here's the Atlanta poem. Now, Atlanta child murders poem. The only victim whose body was never found was Darren Glass. They never found Darren. Darren was a foster child. By the way, they eventually did arrest and convict a man for only 2 of those murders. The others were not solved, and he's still in prison, but for only 2. Here is a poem in which Darren, who was never found, is speaking. I am one of the innocents slaughtered by a world that never heard stories we told and songs we sang. I know the rage of night, but you needn't worry or wonder. I am safe and strong, not a black boy shattered by the weight of hate, the one who became vapor in the twilight of day. I am sounds stirring cool spring air, the ones you can never name. I am a mist of blinding fog, faces of clouds and the whir. I am not flesh, bone, or dust. I am invisible but real, like a bud in the garden of your children's dreams. I don't remember my mother and father, how I became glass, but I know that I am Darren, broken yet whole. And so this poem, a little background information, is titled Sermon of the Dreamers. Now, shortly after I was appointed Poet Laureate, I got a call from Phoebe Hayes, or an email or something. Y'all know Phoebe Hayes? Many of you, I'm sure, do. who founded the Iberia African American Historical Society, and still heads it as its president. And Phoebe asked me to compose an original poem to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the 1944 expulsion of 8 black leaders in Iberia Parish in 1944. These leaders were literally run out of town. 4 of them were doctors. They never returned. A difficult poem, a challenging poem to write, and I've only recited it once, the day I came to New Iberia in November of 2019 to recite it. So this is my second time. How much irony is that, huh? That the second time I'm back in New Iberia, this time at the Shadows. I think God is on me some kind of way. He's all over me, man. He's kind of directing my paths. Sermon of the Dreamers, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the expulsion of black leaders in Iberia Parish, Louisiana. The poem begins with an epigraph from Genesis, chapter 34, 20th verse. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. We have the guns. It's in 2 parts. 1, we have the guns. Let us hunt and cage the Africans. Bestial and void of soul, plunder their paltry possessions, strip them of country, language, birth, name, and heritage. Sail them far from the earth they till, beyond their forests, hills and shores, beyond memory, and dare them to look back. We have the guns. Let us own the Africans until death, brand them like beasts, use them to make profits of our fields, berate and bullwhip them, silence their drums and songs of redemption, and dare them to fight. We have the guns. Let us make laws to keep the Africans unfree. Muzzle them, lock them up, bolt our doors, banish their leaders, bury our books, forbid them to seek, find, and teach the power of knowing, and dare them to dream. 2, we are the dreamers, African Americans, Louisianians, Iberians, born of fire and rock, children of a God who can't be chained, a spirit that can't be broken. Oh, America, our country, tears of thee, come with us. Walk the fields of death and degradation that made you rich and powerful. The past that portends your future. Our journey across gut-churning seas and bitter, blistening plains, through streams of shed blood. The past that no night falls, no deafness, silence, or shut eyes, no brightly gleaming dawns will ever bury or fade. Come with us, America. Trace the bombast and hypocrisy in godly beliefs and declarations you spoke. All the gardens not blooming of seeds you sowed long ago. Trace the innocence you ravaged, making fears of our days, and the poverty you made of race and color, with walls that smothered hopes of our families and children. Oh, beautiful America, land that we love. Follow all the hell you gave us over centuries of suffering. Walk the wilderness and stony roads we trod, barefoot and burdened, through the valley to the mountaintop, where we now stand, free, unbent, and unbroken, standing with for Turner, Tubman, and Douglass, Du Bois, and Hamer, Rosa, Malcolm, and Martin, for Jesse Washington, Emmett Till, Alton Sterling, and victims of hate and injustice of all races and creeds, standing for loving mothers and fathers, with children going wherever their dreams will take them, never forgetting the harrowing, horrifying nights when Hardy, Pearson, Williams, and Falk were brutally beaten, driven out of town, dumped into a road, and told to walk fast, don't look back, and don't return if they wanted to see another morning sun. Never forgetting why Lilly, Volta, Dorsey, and Scogans, seeing the same flames of hate jetting toward their doors, hurriedly packed and left town, leaving all they had built and the bright futures their sacrifices had promised. Oh, America, our beautiful, beloved, sweet land of liberty, we stand strong and mighty for them and millions more in God's village, armed with faith, overlooking the valley, honey dripping from the rock, sunlight draping our shoulders, drums beating, voices lifted, the past in our gaze and the future in our hands, fighting back, marching on, and we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. All right, that concludes my reading segment. I'm going to come back and read one more poem at the end, a brand new poem. I think I just finished it this morning, so. Or maybe even on my drive to New Iberia from Youngsville. I don't know, but it's still in my head. So let's pause, because I know poetry it's a lot to take in when somebody's just reading these poems. It's not like a story, you know, it's got a beginning and ending to it, right? I'm kind of bouncing around. It's kind of hard to stay awake, I think. But any questions? I'm open to any questions anyone has.
The poem you wrote with Dennis Williams, did y'all publish that together as a book?
Yeah.
The pictures and the poem?
Yes. Yeah, if you, I can grab it with I know I got a camera. By the way, I'll be one of the authors out on Main Street tomorrow. Okay. I'll be this is a sales pitch here.
Okay.
I'll be in front of the bookstore with a table set up, and but I want to show you. There's art. I didn't want to open it, but here it is. Yeah, this is the book, Spirits of the Gods, and it's got 32 poems and 32 beautiful pieces of art. Get the book for the art, nothing else. Right? And I didn't want to open it because I had copies of those poems, but this is. Just, I mean, you're familiar with Dennis's work. You can tell Dennis's work just by looking at it that it's by him.
I just couldn't hear from back here. You said that's available?
Yeah, I'll have a few copies with me tomorrow. at the bookstore. I'll be in front of the bookstore. This is the only one. You can buy this one now. I'll probably sell it to you cheaper than the bookstore. But yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I obviously had a career before this, but have you always written poetry?
Oh, I don't know if we have time to answer that question there, but I can't. I can't say pinpoint the exact time, but I do know about when. I mean, I was actually living in Lafayette, working in government, and I'd always loved to read, and I was reading. I've always loved literature, and I was reading poetry, and something just kind of came over me that just started writing. There was a moment. I think it was in 1994. My uncle Victor died, and Victor was my uncle, but he was younger than me, my mother's little brother, and he and I were like brothers, right? And to be honest with you, if it weren't for poetry, I don't think I could have gotten through that. In my older age, and went back to school to get my MFA because I dabbled in poetry for long enough. I felt like I needed to fine-tune the craft. So, but yeah, that's a short answer to a very long question. I'm told I have 5 minutes. I wanted to read one Muhammad Ali poem, but I don't know. Let me shut it down with. Well, I might have time for one Ali poem, but if I can find the other poem that I want to close with, the new poem, maybe I didn't bring it. Wouldn't that be something, huh? Oh, here it is. Here it is. But let me read a short Ali poem, huh? This book, Muhammad's Mountain, is the only one ever published in the entire universe devoted entirely to the life of Muhammad Ali, and it was really created for that purpose. But because I couldn't find any poems out there written about him, but here's one, and I'll make it a short one that you might enjoy reading, hearing. Ali, as we know, was as much of a humanitarian in his older age as he was a fighter as a younger man, But this is a poem about the moment he lit the torch in 1996 to open the Olympic Games. It's titled Torch, The Torch. Muhammad, 20 years before you left us, we saw you appear out of pitch black darkness on the mountainside and watched you step slowly toward a blooming bush, your hands trembling like a man twice your age, held a lit torch and raised it high above your head, as if you were saluting your maker, the first and only lasting spirit of humankind. You reached down and touched the bush with your torch until an all-consuming fire lit the midnight sky. Through tears, joy, and adulation, through history and your life flashing before us, we watched you stand straight and strong until you became our lives, our torch, our flaming, blooming cauldron for dark, unsettling days. I could read every poem of that book over and over again. I love that book. Here's my last poem, and it's titled "The Shadows." Now, I'm stepping out on this, guys. Nobody's ever heard this but y'all, so it's scary, man. First time. The shadows. Bayou land, sugar land, enslavers and those enslaved, letters, photographs, and ledgers, keepsakes and cloth, stories passed down, stories, histories untold, too many, too much, gone too soon, forgotten, not remembered. Here in the South, in Iberia, on the land, on the bayou, at the mansion, we, the shadows, know all who lived here, all who sweetened the fields, buried beneath our shading canopies, or faceless inside the drooping moss of our beckoning boughs. In the vicissitudes of seasons, we birth wind-born seeds for forests centuries away, filled with the coo and wing whistle of morning doves. Patiently, we watched patterns hewn, the mosaicked and painted, the marbled and bare, disparate, separate, now bound together. When the day star is ablaze and its beams pierce the sky, when memory slumbers and dies deep in the dark well of truth, we live, we remember, we tell. Thank you.